All good?
Well, you already live.
Oh, okay. You gotta do a motion. All right, good morning again.
Good morning.
It is so very good to see you. This morning we are going to continue on in our study of the book of Ephesians. So go ahead and turn over to Ephesians chapter 6. And last week we went into the bondservant master discussion, which I believe modern application there would be employer-employee discussion. And it all deals with the mentality really from the employee toward the work, doing things with integrity, honesty, uprightness. Says in sincerity of heart as to Christ, not as men pleasers or with eye service, but doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men. Verse 8 comes in here, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. And you masters do the same thing to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. Okay, verses 8 and 9 are where we kind of left off with this discussion.
Which chapter?
Chapter 6 of Ephesians. Whereas one man called it Ephesians, because they're from Ephesus. I don't call it, but I use common sense. But, there's all kind of people. And I had a preacher growing up, he used to say Matthew is Matthew. That one really bugged me a lot. Especially when it's all takes us on Matthew 27. Oh, no. What are you doing all over again? Okay, getting off topic already. Okay. But Ephesians 6, verse number 8 and 9, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. Verses 8 and 9 deal with impartiality that is shown toward individuals. How there is no one that is to be beneath the goodness and kindness of a Christian or from a Christian. Sometimes, when we look at this section, we think about the idea of slave or free. Well, the idea of a slave or free, sometimes you think, if someone is indebted to me, I may treat them with a little harsher hand than someone who doesn't have anything to do with me at all. Kind of like an employee type thing. The employee can leave whenever he wants to. But if there's someone that has a particular debt to me, I may, or if I am more responsible for them because they're more tied with me, I may be, more stricter. I may be have more rules, those kind of things you got to abide by. Because you got to do exactly as I say, which we would not have that for someone who's just an employee. They can leave whenever they want. So he's saying, with that mentality, how should you behave? Should both people be treated with the same manners and respect, according to this section? Any guesses? What do you think, Horace? Rick's out of town, so you got to help me out. So, no matter if someone is intimately tied up with you or they're an employee, do we change how we behave toward either person? Okay. That's it. All right. Well, I won't get into that on live TV. That's a landmine. All right. My wife's side. We'll say it like that. Okay. So, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord. This is interesting because sometimes we look at life as kind of a sequence of transactions. If you give me this, I will return this in exchange. If you do good to me, I'll do good back to you. But and kind of package it up inside of the golden rule. Matthew 7 verse 12. Whatever. What's the golden rule? You know what the golden rule is? As I do unto you. Okay. Right. I was going to, but say I lost Hitler. Okay. Doing as they do unto you, to a lot of hearts. Okay. So when we look at this idea of the golden rule, he's just saying if you carry on with the golden rule, if you have the mentality of I'm going to be kind because I want them to be kind back. Now, here's the thing about this, though, that I think can be a trap to fall into. What if they're not being kind back? How then do I still respond to the individual? Well, this is instructions saying, essentially, you have to be very mindful. He's not saying it, but I think he's implying it of the judgment. What kind of things do you want to have said about you in the judgment? Like one of my things that I do try to carry on in the back of my mind is everyone I come in contact with, I try to treat with kindness and gentleness because I want that person to either grow stronger as a Christian or become a Christian, and I don't want to go into judgment and God say that person refused to put on Christ because you were an idiot with them. I don't want to have that over my head. And so that's my personal thing. You can do whatever you want to do. But and a lot of that kind of comes from this kind of a verse. Yeah, there are other verses too that kind of lead me in that direction. But to me, I think that you definitely have to have a certain mentality. Because you have other verses like Acts 10, verse 34, which goes right to verse number 9 here. It says that there is no partiality with God. And that verse is dealing with the idea of salvation. And then you hook that up with Galatians 3, verse 27 through 29, about there's neither slave nor free, male nor female, Greek or Scythian, barbarian. They're all one in Christ. Okay? So that's the same kind of idea here, but the idea, I think, is dealing with partiality. You see James 2 come in here. He says, do not handle anything with partiality. The Proverbs has a lot to say about partiality and favoritism. He says pretty much just don't do it. Because, and because God gives grace to the humble, what does it do to the proud? He resists the proud. So there's a true sense of partiality there, but from the sense of someone who thinks that they're better is not going to be part of everybody else's group. He said, I'm going to give grace to the humble, to the ones that I'm going to show true impartiality to the ones that are themselves impartial toward me. Okay? He said, that's why I want you to behave in a humble way, not like the Pharisee that sits in the middle of the room and tries to beat his chest out instead of me, who I'm better than this other guy over here. He's showing partiality. Says that grace was given to the one that was standing behind. Luke 18, they 1 through 11, saying, I am, oh man, I'm a sinner. Have mercy on me. And then it says that God gave grace to that individual. So when you look at this idea that there is no partiality with him, the idea is that in verse number 9, now that, that's why it says from the master, from the employer, to give up threatenings, knowing that your own master also is in heaven. But there's no partiality with him. I think that, again, is the judgment. And, I think when you look at workplace environments, anytime that there's a workplace where there's hostility, or it's fear-based. I've been in a few of those. I know some of you probably have as well. And there's very little respect shown. You don't want to sit there for too much longer because you feel like it's very unhealthy or it's toxic or it's not going to be a good place I want to hang out for a long time. I might do it for a little while. I still have something else to do later. You know, that kind of thing. So I might pay the bills for a little bit, but it's not going to be my forever career, you know, because it's just not safe. You know, so and right here he's saying, you know, as someone who is over individuals, we show kindness and graciousness. And, you know, you can tell certain places, I think, by how people are that work there too, kind of what kind of a place it's going to be. If everyone there is nice, sweet, kind, it's probably going to be that the boss might be nice, sweet, and kind. That's kind of people that he or she might try to have around. So you kind of see that kind of stuff too as well. Okay. Now when it comes to this business, though, in verse 9, Paul wrote a letter to Philemon with this exact idea. And in Philemon, he says that, you know, Onesimus, who was a runaway slave, ran away, got converted, lived in Rome, and he was then a fellow laborer or a preacher, most likely a preacher, from the Colossian church, hanging out with Paul on some of his journeys. And anyway, because of the way of the system, he was a runaway slave. He came back, he was sending him back to Onesimus, who was his slave owner, holder, however you want to say it. And he says, because you're both Christians, you treat each other with absolute respect as to the Lord. And so I think, and we look at Ephesians here, I think he's pairing this up with Philemon and Colossians, because there's a lot of thoughts, not my thoughts, a lot of thoughts on the scholars who are there with Paul who knows this. You know, they don't. But anyway, there's a lot of thought that says that Ephesians was written alongside Colossians and Philemon. And so that would also amount to why there might be some similar language here around this kind of slave business. You may not see that necessarily inside the Corinthian letters or other letters of Thessalonians, other things of that sort. So that's an idea too. Okay. So verse 9 goes into the idea that there's no partiality with God. Give up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven. And we understand that God is judge, and God will carry out his judgment. And so essentially he's just saying, you know, mercy is on those who show mercy. Right? All right. Now, verse number 10 comes in here. And there are 24 verses. So there's 10 to 24 here of Ephesians. But we're not going to get to all of it today. Maybe next couple of weeks. Anyway, verse 10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. Okay. Quite a lot deals with be strong in the Lord. What does it mean to be strong in the Lord? Is that like Philippians 4:13 type thing? Through Christ who strengthens me? Okay. Are they the same type of thing?
That is, but see, if you go back and really digest verse 9,
Yeah.
you can get to a perception of how to act and react. Because it says, I'm going to read it under word where it says, Master, in the same way, be good to your slaves. Don't say things to scare them. You know that one who is your master and their master is in heaven, and he treats everyone the same. So see, verse 9, when you look at verse 10, it ties in the fact that your strength is coming through you, but it's not coming from you. You
Okay.
get your strength from God.
Right?
And that would give you the understanding to treat your slave. Okay, so that takes you to the scripture. Anyway, it takes you back to that one scripture where it says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Right.
You know, if you're sincere, you're conscientious, him like you would yourself. And that cover for that, because see, that's what it's saying. You're taking into consideration. I am in charge of them, but I don't have that, no authority other than that. I gotta respect them for what they can do for me as well, even though they my slaves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Ted.
When I read it, it's saying more like, I'm not looking at a physical strength, more like faith and spiritual.
Right. Right. I would. Right. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead, Craig.
Luke 6:35 says, "Ye shall be the children of the highest, for he is kind to be unthankful to the evil." So we're emulating what Christ is doing.
Yeah. 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 What Christ would do. Yeah. Most definitely. So, two things here. One is Philippians 4:13 is in the context of being content. That's the context of Philippians 4:13. Okay. Verse 10, he talks about all the things about learn how to obey, learn how to suffer, learn how to eat and be hungry, all kind of stuff. Okay, that's verse 10, 11, and 12. 13 comes in, and 14 says about, I've learned to suffer distress, as you also, Philippians verse 15, who are generous to me and give me the gift. And so that would be money. And that's the first you go to time for Philippians, the church in Philippi being his one of his primary financial supporters. We normally consult that verse for that information. And so in Philippians 4:13, the strength is dealing with the idea of being content overall. This one's dealing with more of a warfare. Okay? So, two different kinds of strength. This is the active strength. Philippians 4:13 is the quiet strength. Okay? So, and why I think it's important to differentiate the two is called sometimes we'll pair them up together and we'll say there it is. It is different. And Philippians 4:13 has been abused quite a bit, especially inside like sports and those kind of things. They'll have my high school where I grew up at, we had how you run through the posters for football games? Well, they would write, strengthen through Christ, Philippians 4:13 or whatever, all the time before you go out there to war. It's like that verse dealing with quiet peace that would not dealing with going out there and beating up your opponent. But we're going to pray about it first, Also, it's kind of funny. But anyway, this verse, I think, would be a better one for what you're looking for. Okay? So, that's Ephesians 6, verse 10. Be strong in the might, in the power of his might. Okay? Be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. All of that's dealing with a few things about God. There in verse number 10. Number 1, verse 10 shows us that God is one that does, in fact, give strength. Number 1, be strong in the Lord. You may look at Psalm 139 for a lot of that discussion. A lot of Psalms really deal with that. Psalm 91 is another good one. Psalm 75 is another good one. And in the power of his might, some suggest here, there are two suggestions. Number 1, the first suggestion is the power of his might is dealing with the gospel. Romans 1:16. The second suggestion or thought process around this is dealing with the presence of God in times of trouble. Kind of like you read in 2 Timothy 4, verses 16 through 18. Okay? Where Paul says that no one stood with me, but the Lord strengthened me. Okay? He's not out there fighting a war, is he? He's in prison, facing his execution. And so there's two suggestions here. I think both could be equally fine and both could equally be applicable to the verse. But so when you put all that together, though, it reads, be strong in the strength that God supplies, and in the power, the explosive nature of his might. I think it shows you, the gospel also shows you again the quiet strength. So you could pair up Philippians 4:13 with this. You could, but I think it is a different context. Okay? That's all I'm trying to say. All right. How do we do that? Well, it says, put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Now, verse 11 looks a lot like James 4. Let me get over here and read my verse here. James 4, verses 1 through 4. Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? Now, the word war there in James 4, verse 1 is the word strategio or stratio, the strategy. So, you see the idea building here that everyone has to contend with your conscience. Everyone's got to contend with their choices, whether or not I know I may think one thing and do another thing. And then I have to lastly contend with what does the scripture say about the matter. And so when it comes to James 4, verse 1, pairing that up with Ephesians 6, verses 10 and 11, he's saying that you have power, and that obviously is from God, not from us. The choice to make, the conscience to look at, is to put on the whole armor of God. What's the purpose of the armor? Is it to go out and fight? It says to withstand. What does that mean? Defend. Yeah. Because we all have to have a choice. Now, in James 4, verse 1, what are you defending yourself from? Now, Ephesians 6 deals with the wiles. I know some verses there put the word schemings or devices of the devil. Yes. What are those? I think comes from our own desires. Okay? That's why I think you read other verses like 1 Peter 5, verse 7, casting all your cares upon him, for he careth for you. Because what will the devil use in your fight against him? He's going to use what you care about. That's why Peter would say, cast it on to God. Put everything that you care about on to God, and then you worry about your faith and trust in God. James 4 says that we all have to have a strategy. If you don't, you're taken away. And so when it comes to putting on the whole armor of God, withstanding, then we have to understand that there is a choice to make to defend ourselves by understanding our own desires and lives that carry on the consequence of death and sin. Go ahead. What do you got, Horse?
Chapter 4, and then try to tie it in with what we read in Ephesians.
Yeah.
Okay. And we look at it like what verse 11 says, we use another verse where it says, wear the full armor of God. Wear God's armor so that you can fight against the devil's clever tricks. Now,
Yeah.
verse 4 says, from whence cometh war and fighting among you. Come them not hence even of the lust that warreth in your members. Okay. What we have to understand when we tie into the scripture, then, the devil, how he challenges you, he exploits your weaknesses.
Yeah.
And that's what he's going to approach you with to get you to sway either way. He's going to exploit your weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have the strength and the courage to stand up against it.
Sure.
Because that's where you're on guard, because you don't really realize he's exploiting your weaknesses.
That's correct. That's correct. And it's kind of like, you know, when you look at the temptations of Jesus in Matthew 4, 1-11 there, and Luke 4, you know, there were 3 temptations of Jesus. It's interesting that he thought he knew the weaknesses of God. He thought God would, and I think it's interesting because sometimes, you know, people think that God's just some powerful person who likes to have power. He can do whatever he wants. Well, he can, but God still operates in a realm of justice and fairness. He's not going to do whatever he wants just because he can. You know, he still operates on a very high level of holiness, doesn't he? And so in Matthew 4, 1-11, you know, one of the temptations for Jesus was, you know, fall down, worship me. I'll give you these kingdoms. You know, it says, you see that stomach getting into bread? Now you're hungry. You've been 40 days, 40 nights to get into bread. Jesus, you hungry? Feed yourself for it. No, don't trust God's providence. You know, and so each one of those temptations, though, is dealing with the devil attempting to go at things that he thought God cared about, which I find very interesting because people try to do the same thing with God today, and they say, well, you know, God's only matter, you know, God only wants to have all the power and authority, and look at him. But really, what did Christ do to defend against that? Did he do it with himself? What did he do? He used Scripture. Okay? So, when you look at Ephesians 6, verses 10 and 11, James 4, and I like that. I like what version you're reading. Good. You know, it shows you that the devil will, I think, try to find things.
Yeah.
But it all comes down to our response to it. And so even though there may be a temptation there, does not mean that we have to go into it. It's the idea of the secret sin, you know, and what you do in secret, and kind of, you know, that's who you really are, you know. Well, you know, what do you do when you are in secret? Do you sin more easily than you do when someone's watching you? And then I think that's when you begin to see more of this discussion play in here. What do you do when someone can't monitor your thoughts and words, but you can monitor yourself? Does that mean that what you're saying is less wrong or whatever? You know, and then, yeah, we have the whole thought process reconstruction happening there. And this is what he's trying to get a hold of. He's trying to help us be stronger and to on him and on the will of God. And I think he's trying to really implant that thought into our minds, because when our minds are not grounded, it's very easy for our thoughts to wander very quickly. And so here, I think in this section, he's trying to say, number one, verse 10, it's kind of where I was going a minute ago. Number one, when it comes to the power, it comes from God. And so don't worry about whether or not you can will it through or not. You trust God, you put your faith in God, and God will help you out along the way. That's Romans 8:11. Okay, so verse 11 of chapter 6. Oh, hang on. Let me finish James 4 really quick, and then we'll go back to Ephesians 6 here. James 4, verse 2. You lust and do not have, you murder and covet and cannot obtain, you fight and war, yet you ask, you do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask amiss, that you may spend it on your pleasures. Okay, and that deals with the mentality that he's fighting against right here in Ephesians 6. Okay, so the idea there is, again, say you should have had faith, but because you allow things in, you ask prayers amiss. Okay, so I think right here in chapter 6, before you go in to fight, you have to get your mind right. You know, and we all understand the difference in, you know, being prepared to go into war. even if you are equipped, if your mind ain't right, it doesn't matter what happens next. You know? And we all understand, the whole thing attached to this is, it's on the front and on the back. I get it. Don't run away. I understand that. But what happens if you are ready, you know the answers, but your heart's not in it? What happens to that person? They may fall quickly, and I'm thinking about, Saul and David and how they were going to go fight Goliath. And what happened? Remember that? How they all were going to have their champions in the Valley of Elah there, and they were all going to call up their champion, and it should have been Saul. He was one that was head and shoulders above everybody else, but he said, I'm going to stay in the camp. I'm going to find somebody else to go out there and fight for me. No one ever showed up. They were out there for days and days and days and days and days. David shows up to come and give his brother some food from his father's house, come and give his brother some food. And he's saying, what's all this commotion about? They explain it to him. I'll go. Remember that? Then Saul's like, well, you can't go by yourself. Put on the armor that I have made just for me. He couldn't wear it because it wasn't made for him. It was very fitted material. He couldn't wear it because it wasn't made based on him and his body type. And so he says, I'm just going to go out there wearing nothing. He's wearing clothes, but, not wearing any armor. And then here comes Goliath. Some say he was 9 feet. Some say he was 7, 9, some say he was 13 feet. Don't know. But he was a big old guy anyways, coming out there. And then, he's fully geared up, And we know the story goes that David said, I've beat lions, I beat bears by the power of God, and by the same power of God, I'm going to beat you too. He laughed about it. He criticized Israel about it. And then we know the story. He went and found 5 smooth stones from the brook. One smooth stone went to the sling, went round and round and round, and went into that sling, into that giant's head. That giant came tumbling down. He took the giant's own sword, Goliath's sword, cut off his head, and that sword became a relic that would follow Israel around for years. So when you look at what's happening, I think in that situation, based on Ephesians 6, you can't wear somebody else's faith to fight your battles. You can't wear somebody else's armor. When it comes into you, you have to do it yourself. And so that's where I think comes into this idea of choices. You have to go with your conscience. You have to go with at the end of the day, really your faith. Where's your faith really at? Where's your heart really at when it comes to a time of hardship? So I think Paul's trying to, number one, get our minds right in verse 10. Verse 11, he's trying to get our equipment right. David didn't have it, but he knew that he still had the right thing to beat Goliath. The same thing comes to us. We don't have to wear somebody else's armor. We put on the armor of God. And notice that as well. It's not even our own. It's the armor that God has. God is one who's giving this to us. Okay? He's the one who's going to give you strength, not from yourself. Because spiritual is going to fight with spiritual. Okay. Verse 12 comes in. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand excuse me, in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one, and take the helmet of salvation, really quick, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Now I'm done. Go ahead. What you got? Oh, okay. I'll let you.
14, like I got another version of verse 14 where it says, "So stand strong with the belt of truth tied around your waist and on your chest, where the chain of right living." See, this armor gives you covering for certain distinct, like you said, conscious
Yeah.
thoughts you may bring within your thought process. And if we carry these different illustrations into our thought process, we can actually receive all of this covering from God.
Right.
Yeah, and see, we haven't got to that verse yet, but verse 17 is really one of the verses that we really, if we look at it, while we're here, this salvation as a helmet, and it is what we won't receive until we leave this out of time. We carry that salvation, that helmet,
Okay.
that hope for it here.
Sure.
And then, like you say, and then that sword of the Spirit, which is it says in one verse, the word of God here says, is the teaching of God. So see, what's going to really carry us is how we wear that armor ourselves, which is like you said earlier, before you finished. It comes from within a conscious process of how we going to apply it.
Right.
Our lives,
Right.
into our intent, into what we're doing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Craig.
Sword, because sword
Yeah, sword.
is two edges.
Yeah.
It's the only offensive weapon that you see.
True.
You have to be careful how you do it. The two edges that's coming, that's rolling.
Yeah. 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 Hebrews 4:12 there. Yeah. 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 That's good. Good point. Good point. Now, verse 12 is interesting because, especially inside of our culture, where there's such a massive political divide, and it comes to this idea of politics and stuff. And some would say, well, if you're Republican, you're a Christian. If you're Democrat, you're not. This kind of stuff. We're not going to get into that because there's a lot of stuff on both sides of the aisle that's crazy. Anyway, but when you look at this idea about saying, don't wrestle with government things, okay? Why not? What's so wrong? Doesn't the Bible say you should defend your faith in light of the government oppression? What's he talking about here? You don't wrestle with principalities and powers. Does this mean you got to be political? Talking about. Do you think he's talking about here about don't be political or do be political? Verse 12.
Okay. Verse 12. Okay, that we are fighting against the rulers and authorities and the powers of this world of darkness. Okay, who's in the power?
Okay.
Right now, the president has power, the congressman has power, the judges have power, all of the authorities have power. But what we hear in the news, all of them are abusing that power.
Yeah.
So what are they covering here? World's darkness. And see, so that really not giving us a lot of options from a spiritual standpoint, because it's letting us know everything around us is evil.
Yeah. Yeah, no matter who's in power. There's still some stuff going on.
Everything around us is evil.
Yeah.
And he said, we're not fighting against that. And then we're not, because we're in the middle of it, just like the way we talk about the situation now that's going on in Iran.
Yeah.
How everybody looking at how the oil prices is reflecting on the gas prices.
Yeah.
And see, that's something, like I even talked about that.
I'm gonna get you.
We're gonna be satisfied as long as we live in, because they've been taking taxpayers' money, squandering it on all this stuff, and saying we have a deficit of trillions of dollars just to justify it.
Yeah.
And then they doing as they please with that.
Mhm.
But like you say, we don't want to get into the politics. Man, it's just, that's what I'm saying. So it's a lot bigger even than what we're sitting here talking about.
Yeah.
We'll never know how far that.
Oh, I know. All the deep state stuff.
Yeah.
And what I find crazy is no matter who's in power, they're always the Antichrist.
Yeah.
Every time, no matter who you are. You're the Antichrist every time. Okay. What do you got?
I think this verse is talking about spiritual and minds. It says, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers of the dark world. So it's not talking about us in our world now. It's talking about in the spiritual sense. One question that I'd like to ask when it talks about this is, when Jesus was tempted by the devil, was his flesh tempted or was his spirit tempted?
I say both. Okay. Really quick, and I'm going to end up with this because I think it's interesting. Okay, go ahead. Yes. I think I'll let you go and tell me. Okay, go ahead.
I thought it was when I read that scripture, I was thinking of the spiritual authority.
Yes, it is.
It's not, and people have a tendency, yes, and that what influences people is evil. And so Satan, battle against Satan.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, what you got?
There's always say the same thing, always on the spiritual, real battle is spiritual.
Yes, it is.
And we as Christians fall short whether you go one party or the other.
Correct.
You just can't pick the right side because at the end of the day, man is involved.
Yeah.
And we don't know what the end game is all about. Usually it's about power and money.
Yeah.
And I told
or favor.
One
Yeah.
time, he said, well, I can get more money if I vote this way. I
Yeah.
said, so is that like the love of money?
Yeah.
So you can ignore other stuff? I said,
Yeah.
I'm like, this is no win.
That's right. It is.
Whatever part you go with, you can't win.
Yeah.
Because spiritually speaking, they're both corrupt.
They are. They are. I agree. So this verse, to me, how I look at it, very similar to what y'all are saying, is the world does not comprehend the power of God. Okay? That's how I look at this verse. The world does not comprehend anything about the kingdom or the church that is beyond their ideas of what it means to have power and authority. And that's why when you look at Matthew 16, verse 17, right after Peter says to Jesus, "You are the Son of the living God," what did Jesus say to Peter in Matthew 16, verse 17? You didn't learn this from man. Man didn't understand the nature of the kingdom. Daniel 2, verse 44 and 45, the kingdom's going to come in and consume all of the world's kingdoms, and it does. Man could not do that. Our kingdoms could never do that with such gravity and such immensity of force and power. Never. Verse 12, of this chapter here is dealing, I think, with how we're fighting in a war with individuals who don't understand the gravity of the soul or the immensity of who God is. And so don't let the world's stuff get in the way of you and your God. And don't let politics, or don't let anything else get in front of you and your faith. He's trying to say that doesn't make any sense to anybody else. You worry about what you're going to do in your own faith and how you're going to live out your life according to the will of God, having a good conscience along the way, and doing all of it by the authority of Christ. Okay? He's trying to peel all that stuff back. He said that at the end of the day, it's all about how you are going to help fight against the devil on behalf of the kingdom of God. Okay? So that's how I look at verse number 12. It's not at all dealing with Paul's own. This is dealing with the world to understand what you're talking about. And yet we still live on true and faithful. Okay? So we'll stop there. Next week, we'll go on to verse 13. Okay? Thank you for being in class today. Appreciate the comments. And we'll have worship here in a few minutes.